Well, welcome back to another episode of Continuum Meditations Discusses. In this episode, we're going to take a step back. We're going to take a step back from my original review and first impressions video on the new Star Trek streaming series, Strange New Worlds. The reason for that is I want to give a bit of a reanalysis of my first viewing of the episode, and what I want to do in addition to that is think about what we are seeing, what we have seen with Kurtzman Trek, or New Trek as it has come to be called, and where it seems to be going, and where it seems to continue to be going. Now, I've had, as I originally stated, had the opportunity to watch the series premiere of Strange New Worlds 4 times now. I've actually watched it a 5th time since, and I've had an opportunity to watch its 2nd episode, Children of the Comet, twice. But in my first video, I think it was maybe a bit too reductionist or too simplistic in its evaluation. And though I was somewhat, at least, enthusiastic about what I saw, subsequent viewings of the episode gave me more pause. And I think it's important to delineate why I continue to have pause and concern about what is commonly called today New Trek. So there are things to me, unfortunately, about Strange New Worlds that show that it is in fact still Kurtzman Trek, that it has been conceived, characterized, conceptualized, and stylized by those with a different manner of perceiving not just Star Trek, but the world itself. To me, it's important for those, especially for those of us who are a bit older now, not simply to delineate this as being, well, that's the new generation, and they're not, it's just they're inferior to us, kind of thing. We've all heard that kind of talk. Even generations that preceded us said the same thing, and I think to some degree every generation seems to have that kind of mindset. But are there bases in fact for saying such things, in this case about Kurtzman Trek versus old-style Star Trek that originated with Gene Roddenberry and came down through Rick Berman and Brannon Braga et al. Through that era? And do we need to really flesh out a little bit more about what we're thinking about when we're talking about the inferiority of Kurtzman Trek, and why it is in fact inferior, and why some of us think the way we do, even though we try to give it a fair shake with respect to entertaining us and carrying on that Star Trek legacy? Let's get into some of that right now.
Oh, the absurdity of these inferior beings.
Let's begin by putting an end to the notion that what we are watching with Strange New Worlds and other versions of Alex Kurtzman Star Trek is anything but Kelvin timeline Star Trek material. In other words, we should put to rest the notion that what we are seeing in the modern Kurtzman-controlled era of Star Trek is prime Star Trek universe dramatization. Once this is done, I believe that we can begin to judge Strange New Worlds and all these other Kurtzman atmospherics as upon their own merit, instead of consistently going back and hearkening to the original Star Treks of yore. That is, Classic Trek, Next Gen, and so on. Now, I know that there has been a persistent argument since the 2009 J.J. Abrams version of Star Trek about what is versus what is not prime Star Trek. And I know that that argument was quite vociferous, especially during the opening days of Star Trek Discovery, and it is an argument that I found worthy then. But at this point, I think that is a moot discussion, because what I believe what we are watching now is all Kelvin timeline. it is all some version, at least, of the Kelvin timeline reboot, and that what we are now seeing with the Abrams-Kurtzman era of Star Trek has been inculcated, infused, and solidified into our consciousness to the point that many believe that this Star Trek is the Star Trek. Now, let me also say at this point that I also believe that when this first broke out, that is, when this argument first broke out, we were subjected to propaganda, to befuddlement, to bamboozlement, and arguments that were designed to deliberately confuse us as to what is and what is not Prime Universe. And there were persistent efforts made by the creators of Star Trek Discovery, that is Alex Kurtzman and his clique, and their sycophants in the media, to tell us that if we did not believe and accept, therefore, that Star Trek Discovery was in fact Prime Universe material, we were racists, we were misogynists, we were other baskets of deplorables, to use Hillary Clinton's phrase.
You know, to just be grossly generalistic, you could put half of Trump supporters into what I call the basket of deplorables. Right? The racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, Islamophobic, you name it.
And therefore we were not part of the Star Trek community. I remember these arguments. I hope some of you, for the sake of historicity, also remember them. But many of us rebelled, and we did not accept this phony argument. And many of us began to realize that this explained why. That is, that we were in an alternate universe of Star Trek. This explained why the uniforms were all different in Star Trek Discovery, why the equipment was all different, why the ships were all different, why the people were all different and acted so oddly, weirdly, quite frankly, even psychopathically in some cases, and why what we were watching was some alternate form of Star Trek that no one had ever heard or seen before, and we did not accept it. But with respect now to Strange New Worlds, I think we can see the same thing. By recognizing that we are in fact in an alternate universe, we don't have to keep going back and comparing this Captain Pike to the Captain Pike of the original series debut or pilot. We don't have to keep going back and asking, why is there a George Samuel Kirk on this Enterprise when there was no George Samuel Kirk on the original Enterprise? How did Captain Kirk's brother beat him onto the starship that he would later command? Well, the answer is easy. This is a different universe. Why does this Mr. Spock act so strangely and immature? Well, because this is a different Mr. Spock. Why is this Nurse Chapel so snarky? Because it's a different Nurse Chapel, and she's in a different universe. You see? And so now that when we start looking at things this way, we can start thinking about these characters for their own merit. While we're on the subject of these characters, I want to draw attention to something that I continue to also observe about Kurtzman Trek that quite honestly has begun to perturb me, to disturb me, and to make me wonder about the actual maturity level of the individuals who are writing these programs. In Star Trek Strange New Worlds, we have, how many characters do we have? 9, right? I haven't bothered to count them all at this point. But out of those 9 characters, we now have thus far at least 5 of them who seem to have some form of crippling, traumatic, or tragic background that has somehow stunted their either their emotional development or their mental development, or perhaps some combination thereof. Let's start with the captain, Captain Pike. Now, let's not misunderstand. When I say Captain Pike and his emotional development, at this point I'm not talking about his childhood or anything of this nature, thus far that we know of anyway, in this particular version of Captain Pike. But we are talking about the tragic accident that occurs about a decade or so from now that they continue to harp on in the storyline, that is continuing to plague his psyche, to plague his, perhaps some of his actions that he chooses to take, and so forth. Then we have Lieutenant Uhura, who we learn in the second episode, Children of the Comet, her parents and brother were killed in a tragic shuttle accident. Then we have La'an. Actually, we learned of her before Uhura, if I'm not mistaken, whose traumatic childhood included a tragic run-in with the Gorn species, who killed her entire colony in these very horrific and gruesome ways and used them for other material that, of course, left an indelible bad imprint upon her psyche. Then we come to find out that number one, Commander Chen Riley, Una, is hiding her true heritage, and now that she has this big secret that she has to keep from Starfleet, keep from her captain, although no longer, and keep from the rest of her shipmates, although in part no longer. And this is going to cause her issues, perhaps, in the future. And then we have, after that, the good Dr. Mbinga himself, whom we find out is concealing his daughter's transporter pattern because she is suffering from some disease which he cannot find the cure, or at least cannot yet find the cure for. Now, why do I point this out? Because it seems to me that at this point, New Trek seems to be filled with this form of storytelling, and quite frankly, I think not only is it boring, but it's lazy writing. Now, at no time in the past have I regarded any of the Star Treks that I have seen in the past, whether they be from the Next Generation, the original series, DS9, Voyager, or even Enterprise, as having this many characters who happen to have some kind of emotional crutch that just cripples them or hinders them from doing their duty and focusing on their jobs as adults. Now, I am not saying to you that we have not had characters from the other series that have not had problems in their past, either from childhood or early adulthood, that they have had to deal with. No, to the contrary, we know that there have been, particularly from the Next Generation. We know about Tasha Yar. We know about Geordi's blindness. We know about Data having been effectively abandoned on Omicron Theta. We know about Commander Riker and his bad relationship, or poor at least relationship, with his father. We know about Captain Sisko, or then Commander Sisko at that time, who lost his wife Jennifer to the Battle of Wolf 359, and thereafter had to raise his son as a single father. But in all of these things, in all of these examples, and others that we could talk about, we have never seen the kind of hanging on to these issues that we seem to get in Kurtzman Trek. And I think that there are examples that we can also cite inside Star Trek Discovery as well, where people are so caught up in their feelings that they cannot seem to act as mature individuals aboard a mature, or inside of a mature space exploration organization that is committed to being out on the frontier. I want to know why in Kurtzman Trek we have to have individuals who are almost in some ways perpetual teenagers who cannot gain control of and mastery of their emotions. It perplexes me that this is the kind of writing that we are subject to today. And the reason why I believe we are subject to this kind of writing is because of the kind of people who are writing it. Today we have people who are caught up in their traumas, in their childhood tragedies, in their emotional impediments, and they carry that forward into their own writing. Is this a product of the current generation, the current generations, Millennial, Zoomer, and whatever else is after them? Is that what's going on? This different outlook that we've got here today? Some inability to deal with life, or perhaps some unwillingness to be able to face life, and therefore we have to put these kinds of notions into our own writing, reflecting our own real world tragedies in the characters that we write about and imagine in our own minds? Is this why we're watching Star Trek? when Star Trek used to represent the best of humanity, especially on board the Starship Enterprise, on board Starship Voyager, on board Deep Space Nine, etc., etc. These were people who were out on the frontier, facing the unknown, facing issues that humans have never seen or dealt with before, and they had to be people who were grounded and rooted and the best of the human species. What is going on with this Kurtzman Trek era that we have to continually have people like this being represented to us? Is this why we turn to Star Trek, to see our peers? Or do we turn to Star Trek so that we can see people who are better than us, whom we can also aspire to in our own way to be like, especially when we are kids and teenagers and young adults ourselves, just trying to find our ways in life? It's a question I think deserves an answer, and it's an observation about Kurtzman Trek that I continue to see unfolding before our eyes.
Oh, the absurdity of these inferior beings.
There is a clear strain of politics running through the modern era of Star Trek that I believe, quite honestly, was not as present and prevalent in old Trek as it is in the current time frame. And this is something that I think needs to be addressed and confronted forthrightly. The current controllers of Star Trek have told us in no uncertain terms that they are leftists. And not just leftists, but hardcore leftists who are doctrinaire in their beliefs and tyrannical in their opinions. Now, this is something that I find odd and disturbing, perhaps more disturbing than odd, because during the entire time that Gene Roddenberry himself, whom we know was a leftist of sorts, of his in and of his own right, during the entire reign, if you will, of Gene Roddenberry over the original Star Trek, for as long as it did last, there was not, well, let me rephrase that, there was an effort to bring a certain balance to the equation of left versus right, at least as it was then understood in this 1960s era. Now, yes, we understand and we acknowledge that Gene Roddenberry in and of himself was, or did have, several beliefs that could have labeled him as a more strict doctrinaire leftist. But we also acknowledge that during that time frame, leftism as it is currently defined could have been considered much more conservative during that day than it is today. And so I think we need to ask ourselves the question, why was it that during the entire time of Gene Roddenberry's control over the original Star Trek, during the time when he ran Next Generation until Rick Berman came along, until the time of Ira Stephen Bear in the TNG/DS9 era, why did we have what seemed to be a balance struck during the 60s and 90s era Star Trek all the way up until Enterprise? But then we have this very radical transformation and shift to the hard left that manifests itself first with Star Trek Discovery and now seems to be snaking its way into Strange New Worlds. Now, I think it's important for us to recognize that there are examples of this. When you put, for example, modern political figures such as Stacey Abrams on Star Trek and make her the president of the Federation of the Future, as they did in Star Trek Discovery, you are sending an unequivocal message about what you believe and what side of the debate you are on. When you put direct political messages about the January 6th attack on the Capitol into your new series and talk about it from the standpoint of a second civil war in the United States and of coming from a background of something that was perhaps a direct or indirect cause of World War III, in your storyline, you are sending an unequivocal political message, an unequivocal statement about what side of the spectrum you are landing on. And I think that this is very biased, regardless of the fact that we know that many people who are on Star Trek, and perhaps even many fans, or at least a sufficient number of fans, themselves may happen to be on the left, or themselves may happen to be in agreement or semi-agreement with this doctrine and with this philosophy. There is a hardcore doctrinaire position or disposition within Star Trek today that I think is, in fact, untenable. And it cannot be accepted. I am not advocating that people turn to the hard right. I am not advocating that people should be in support of any particular politician or group of politicians or parties, whatever you may believe about politics, but there should be some balance. And this is rather disturbing to see the hard turn to the left that is now present in Star Trek and in the Star Trek writing room. We've seen it on Discovery, and now we're seeing some of it at least making its way, snaking its way, sneaking its way into Star Trek Strange New Worlds. And again, this cannot be accepted.
Oh, the absurdity of these inferior beings.
Now, with all I've said, you may think that I actually do not like this program, and you would be wrong. I do, in fact, enjoy aspects of it, at least, to this point. And I have not made the determination, as I did with Discovery long ago, that I will cease watching this program altogether. I am going to continue to keep an open mind, but a critical mind, as to what I am beholding, so that I can evaluate it from a standpoint of right judgment, but also of fair-mindedness. There are some things I did want to say about this show, though, that I quite frankly have not found to be that great. I think you've seen some of those articulated here. But I just happened to, as an aside, I just happened to say that I think that the character of Mr. Spock in this story is not well matched to the actor. Ethan Peck, though he is a good actor, I do not believe is a good fit for this role. And I, in fact, as much as I disliked the Star Treks of J.J. Abrams, I, in fact, think that Zachary Quinto was a better Mr. Spock than Ethan Peck seems to be, at least thus far. Perhaps he will grow into the role. But as of now, I unfortunately do not believe that he is making a very convincing Mr. Spock. I actually do rather, however, enjoy the character of Captain Christopher Pike, and I think that that is, in fact, due to the charisma and the creative or the acting chops of Anson Mount, despite what you may have heard me say about his character development thus far in the previous segment of this video. He is a good captain. He is an able captain. He is a captain that inspires leadership, or should I say inspires those people to follow him, and who inspires people to go out of their way for him. In my opinion, very much like Captain Picard, and yes, even Captain Kirk. So I would look forward to seeing more about his character development as well. And although I was critical of her development thus far, I do in fact like the character of Commander Chen Riley. She does seem to be very observant, very insightful, and very able and capable in her job, and those are qualities that I think are very good for any first officer to have, but particularly as this character has not been defined at all in the previous version of Star Trek that she was in, that is the original pilot. I would look forward to hearing more and learning more about her character. There are characters, of course, who do turn me off in this story, particularly that of La'an Noonian-Singh, whom her standoffishness just does not impress me yet. Perhaps there will be more that will unfold itself to reveal why. We already know why, but that will reveal more, that will give me more empathy towards her in the future. The character of Nurse Chapel in this regard in this particular iteration, rather, of Star Trek. I don't know. She just seems a little too snarky and too little quick with the mot juste, in my opinion. I guess we'll see. Anyway, there are others, of course. The legacy character of Cadet Uhura, now Cadet Uhura, soon to be, I guess, Lieutenant Uhura. I didn't like the way they presented her storyline, her backdrop of this tragedy unfolding, her, with her and why she joined Starfleet. I think when you put a legacy character in those kinds of positions, to me that was disrespectful of the legacy character that she is, and I didn't like that. I didn't like that at all. Why do we have to have every character in New Trek, as I said again in the previous segment, why do we have to have every character in New Trek have some kind of traumatic background, as if that's the only way that we can write a character? I understand that conflict is drama and drama is conflict, but this does not mean that every character needs to come from a poor, broken home, or a parent who died in their youth, or who abused them, or who whatever, was a criminal, or some tyrant, or whatever is going on here. This is not, to me, the way you treat a legacy character like Lieutenant Uhura. And I was disappointed, quite frankly, with this attempt to put more meat on the bones of her background. Anyway, that being said, hopefully there will be more revealed about her that will show why she is a character worthy to be on this program, and how she came to be where she was on the original Enterprise, even though, as I said before, I do not believe that this is the same universe as classic Trek. And I think looking at it that way helps to explain a lot of the canon breaks, and a lot of the continuity breaks, and perhaps even continuity errors that we will probably see as this series goes on. So let me draw down and to conclusion this extemporaneous marathon monologue, because I did not in fact expect it to go on this long. I boldly proclaim to you that the inheritors of modern Star Trek are unequal to their predecessors and unworthy of the mantle that has been bestowed upon them, or perhaps more simply, appropriated by them. And there is rationale for making such a claim beyond mere dint of assertion that one generation is simply inferior to the other. Instead of a commitment to logical drama, we have seen the exact opposite in the creation of illogical, bumbled, and directionless storytelling. Instead of a commitment to fairness, we have seen a dedication instead to societal programming and political indoctrination. And instead of the commitment to the intellectual curiosity and moral integrity that have been hallmarks of Star Trek for nearly 60 years, instead, today, we are treated to the intellectual dearth and moral mess of pottage which this current Star Trek represents. The statement, "This is not your grandfather's Star Trek," is not a statement about the greater quality of storytelling or the greater ethical and moral outlook of today versus yesterday, of modern Trek versus old Trek. It is instead, and should instead be viewed, as evidence of the degradation and the bankruptcy of modern Trek versus old Trek. But hey, I've said enough, and I think that there's plenty here to consider, and plenty for us to recognize without being sycophantic suck-ups to the current Star Trek regime. And so I'm going to leave you with these considerations. And, of course, as always, I invite you to make up your own mind. Not merely about Star Trek Strange New Worlds, whether or not you choose to continue watching that. As I have stated, I will continue watching it myself, but with caution and with a critical eye toward what is being presented. And I invite you to do the same. So, until next time, Star Trek fans, live long and prosper.